All right, we are going to look at the PowerPoint slides for Lab 7, which is body composition. If you look at the first slide, introduction, body composition is defined as the relative contribution of fat mass and fat-free mass to total body mass. We use the two-compartment model. The first blank there is fat mass. Fat mass includes the weight of the subcutaneous fat, visceral fat, and fat from the myelin sheath of the nerves. Fat-free mass is the second blank, and that is the weight of all the fat-free mass, including bones, muscle, organs, connective tissue, and water. Body fat percentage is the percent of total body weight that comes from fat mass. Next slide is lab info. When you look at the data sheet and you watch the videos, you'll see that we did body composition using, excuse me, we used 3 indirect methods. We didn't do 4, we did 3. So hydrostatic weighing, skin fold measurements, and bioelectrical impedance analysis. We left off circumference because that's a less useful measurement and really not worth the time for this lab. How do we measure directly? So in order to measure directly, we would have to kill the individual we were measuring. So we don't measure body fat percentage directly. We use indirect measurements because we don't want to cut people open and measure their fat. Next slide is hydrostatic or underwater weighing, traditionally known as the gold standard. So your blank there is gold standard. Assuming that the test is performed correctly, based on the fact that lean mass is more dense than fat mass. That's Archimedes' principle. The density of lean mass is 1.1 grams per centimeter cubed. Density of fat mass is 0.9 grams per centimeter cubed, and the density of water is 1.0 grams per centimeter cubed. And that'll vary a little bit. You'll see when we do the hydrostatic weighing, depending on the temperature of the water, but it's really going to be really close to 1.0. Therefore, lean mass will tend to sink. So your first blank there is sink, and fat mass will float. Okay, so next slide, hydrostatic weighing. Advantages, the second most accurate indirect measure of body composition. Disadvantages, it requires special equipment. So your first blank there is requires special equipment. It may provide discomfort for the subject, and it is not easily accessible to the general public. So those are all drawbacks of hydrostatic weighing. Next one we'll talk about is skin fold measurements. Skin fold measurements estimates fat by taking representative samples of subcutaneous fat. Subcutaneous fat is fat that's located right beneath the skin. Samples are taken at places where fat typically build up, which is different depending on gender. So when you watch the lab video, we actually took our measurements on Sam, who's a male. Equation used to predict body fat percentage take into account gender, number of sites measured, age, and the measurements. So your blanks there are gender, number of sites measured, and age. Next one, even when done by well-trained individuals, we still have a 3 to 5% error rate with skin folds. Moving on to the next slide. Advantages for skin fold measurements, relatively inexpensive and more suitable for larger groups. So 2 advantages there. Relatively inexpensive and more suitable for larger groups. Disadvantages, on the right-hand side of that slide, requires much practice before being considered skilled. Caliper may cause discomfort. It's fairly invasive relative to other measurements, and it's hard to measure very obese individuals accurately. Next slide, we're going to talk about bioelectrical impedance analysis, or BIA. BIA estimates body fat percentage by sending a very low intensity electrical current through the body from one electrode to another. So electrical is your blank there. Fat-free mass is about 73% water, is therefore a better conductor of electricity than fat mass. Equation used to predict body fat percentage is based on how quickly the current is passed through the body between the electrodes. So we talked about BIA in the lecture notes, so this should be kind of review for you there. Advantages of BIA, next slide. Quick and easy, relatively inexpensive, non-invasive, and portable. Disadvantages, measurement varies greatly with hydration status. So your blank there is hydration status. The more hydrated, the lower the body fat percentage. The more hydrated, the lower the body fat percentage. Body position, recent physical activity, recent food or beverage intake, skin resistance, and medication are all issues with the BIA. Note, BIA measurements are the most reliable when taken at the same time of day, same time between meals, under the same conditions, etc. This does not, however, ensure that the reading is valid. Okay? The next slide is circumference measurement. We're not going to cover that. The following slide after that is circumference measurement as well, so you can ignore those two slides. Go to the next slide. We're going to talk about the DEXA, or dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. So we do not have a DEXA here in the kinesiology department at K-State, but we do have one on campus, and they are the most reliable. So let's talk about that. Single X-ray used to determine whole body and regional distributions of lean tissue, bone, mineral, and fat with a high degree of accuracy. Expected to play a major role in body composition analysis. And if you remember from lecture, DEXA machine will cost around $70,000. So not very cheap, but extremely accurate, the most accurate indirect measure of body composition that we currently have.